Jesse, how was Austin?
Austin was great. I had
tacos. How many did you have?
Tacos. I had 3 breakfast tacos on one occasion.
You must be on a diet.
Oh, and then we got really good Tex-Mex. No, I'm not on a diet. I probably ate 8,000 calories during one Tex-Mex meal. It was just like one of those situations where you see a plate before you and every item on it includes melted cheese.
That's the thing about vegetarians is like vegetarians are known for their healthy eating, which is
that's why I'm so healthy. But yeah, we had a great event with Katie, say everyone who's at the event again.
Connor Friedersdorf, Megan McArdle,
Megan McArdle,
Lee Stein, Kat Rosenfield, River Page, Jesse Single, and I had a question.
Nick Fuentes. Oh, sorry.
I had a question. Phoebe Maltz-Bovey, I saw she was in Texas because of Instagram. She was not included in the event. Why did you eliminate Phoebe? No Canadians?
No Jews.
Oh yeah, that's fair.
No, she couldn't. We tried to include her. She had to get back because she has like
children, family,
a family. Yeah. Maybe you've heard of it.
Well, it's probably a good thing that she didn't stay because I hear they're detaining Canadians now.
You can't deport me. I'm here for heterodoxy.
Yeah, you're going to CCOT.
Yeah. The only downside of Austin, and it's a little bit gross, is that at the Airbnb a bunch of us stayed in, there was a hot tub.
Ew.
There was something wrong. No, it's not like that. Ugh. There was something wrong. All of us who were in the hot tub, I think 4 of us, something with the chlorine was off because we all had like some sort of skin stuff after we all had like itchy.
You hope it was the chlorine.
I hope it was the chlorine. It was very unpleasant. But yeah.
Texas swimmer's itch. Famous for it.
Austin was great. I will say it gets a little bit less weird every time I go there. So I came up with a motto: make Austin increasingly weird.
It'll fit on a bumper sticker.
I think it'll catch on. How are you doing? Where are you?
So I am currently in North Carolina. I have to admit, we are recording this episode early. Normally when we pre-record episodes, we try to anticipate what has happened in the future so that we can comment on something that hasn't happened yet and the people will.
And we have 100% success rate.
Yeah, we hire a psychic.
Our election response one after Trump got elected the second time, we recorded that 2 years early just to be ready.
But yeah, we're recording this one early for a couple reasons. The first reason is that today is January 24th. There is you might have heard of this, Jesse. The ice apocalypse is on its way here. I was actually supposed to be in Durham today for this event at Duke, which sold out. I'll have you know, it sold out. It was free, but it did sell out. And that has been canceled it's been now moved online because of the coming storm. And so I am in North Carolina. I'm still in Asheville, but I'm supposed to be leaving to drive across the country on Wednesday. We will see if any of that happens. This could be the last episode of this podcast. The entire Eastern Seaboard could lose power, could lose internet for weeks, months, years. We don't know. So, it's been fun, I guess.
Okay. I mean, I hope you guys are okay. I don't know what to say other than that. I hope you make it out. Not just to continue the podcast, but because I don't want you stuck there.
I appreciate that. Well, this is a 2-part episode. So if we don't get to record the second part, then people will never know what happened.
Can you imagine?
Yeah.
Just having that hanging over them the rest of their lives.
Yeah, especially because it's about something that they cannot possibly Google. So today, Jesse, we are talking about net neutrality. And this was we've been talking about doing this episode for a long time. We're finally ready to do it. And this was a major story for several years, about a decade ago. And I was under the impression at the time that without net neutrality, the internet would literally die. And then the issue just sort of disappeared. So today and next week, we're going to find out why. We're going to find out what neutrality was, what it is, what happened. We're going to really go deep into this story. We do, however, have to start with some history. And so the next 10 minutes of this episode are going to be slightly dry, but please just stick with us. The history is important and we will get to the good stuff. We will get to Jon Oliver, I promise you.
I can't wait.
All right, let's dive into it. So this is a story about how the internet and public policy and activism and the media and the attention economy all crashed together in one very messy battle, a battle that might not ever truly go away. And I'm hoping to answer the question, is net neutrality necessary for a free and open internet? Do we need it? And did we ever? So Jesse, Before we get into it, let me first ask you to think back to the net neutrality wars of a decade or so ago. So based on your impression of net neutrality back in like 2014, 2015, how would you have defined it?
Well, the internet is a series of tubes, and net neutrality is the idea that the tubes should all be similarly lubricated so that the New York Times does not have a right to have like video go through the tubes faster than some like indie porn site or whatever. The idea, like, it was about corporate power, basically. Like, these big corporate actors could slow down internet for some people, but keep it fast for themselves and their friends, I guess.
Something like that.
So you're saying I didn't nail it with the tubes?
Do you watch a lot of Jon Oliver?
I used to.
We will get to Jon Oliver later, but before we get to that, we're going to start all the way back in the 1930s. Yes, this is a history lesson, because to understand net neutrality, it's important to know just a little bit about the history of communication regulation first. So communication has a long history of federal regulations, but there are two pieces of legislation that are important to the net neutrality fight. The first is the Communications Act of 1934, and the second is the Telecommunications Act of 1996. I assume you are familiar?
I have memorized both, but I'll let you summarize them instead.
So generous. So the Communications Act of 1934 created the Federal Communications Commission, the FCC, and they created it by consolidating these scattered regulatory powers under one roof. So this new agency, the FCC, at the time it consisted of 7 commissioners who were appointed by the president and then confirmed by the Senate. In the 1980s, that number was reduced to 5 commissioners. That's what we have today. But from the very beginning, the rule was that the commission had to be bipartisan. So at the beginning, no more than 4 commissioners could be from the same party. Today, it's no more than 3. And this new commission, the FCC, was tasked with overseeing radio, telegraph, undersea cables, and the telephone. This is, of course, well before the internet. And at that point in history, even the telephone was still pretty new technology. You know, I'm sure you remember this from your 8th grade history class, but the telephone was invented by Alexander Graham Bell or Alicia Gray in 1876. They actually filed the patent on the same day. But Bell won that war, and he later founded the Bell Company, which managed local telephone service across the U.S. But within the decade, people started wanting to make long-distance calls. They wanted to call, I don't know, Aunt Mammy back in Oklahoma. They wanted to talk long distance. And so the Bell Company created AT&T, that was the American Telephone and Telegraph Company. Then, by the 1930s, phones had been widely adopted, and so telephone regulation became central to the FCC's mission. And the 1934 Communication Act that I just mentioned, that established AT&T as a government-sanctioned monopoly. And this persisted for a couple of decades. The monopoly began to crack in the mid-20th century. There were some high-profile antitrust cases. And by 1984, the old AT&T monopoly was broken into 7 regional Bell operating companies called Baby Bells. Yes, it does sound like a cheese. So that'd be like Bell South, Bell Atlantic, etc., and a much smaller AT&T. So that's the early history. And the reason it is important to the net neutrality fights that would come many decades later is that the 1934 Act not only created the FCC, it also gave the FCC the power to regulate what are called common carriers, which in this context refers to telecom companies that provide essential services. So like today, that's AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile, they're all common carriers. What you think of as telephone companies are common carriers. They are actually utilities. And the heart of the net neutrality debate is whether or not internet service providers, so that would be like Comcast, Xfinity, Charter, Spectrum, Frontier, whether ISPs should also be considered common carriers like phone companies and therefore subject to additional government regulations like any other utility. And I will fully admit, I did not understand this until I really started digging into it. I thought net neutrality was about pipes and lubrication and fast lanes and slow lanes, and it sort of is, but that's a really small part of it. So are you with me so far?
I am very much with you.
So the other piece of telecom history that you need to understand before we get to the 21st century is the Telecommunications Act of 1996. So this was an amendment to the 1934 Communications Act, and it's one of the most important laws in modern U.S. telecom history, and it was basically the opposite of the old rules. So the 1934 Act established a monopoly, AT&T, and the 1996 Act was meant to decrease regulation, increase competition, and break up those regional Baby Bell monopolies. They wanted to let the phone market flourish. But this wasn't just about phones at that point. It was also about the internet, because by 1996, the internet has emerged as a household good that at the time was accessed through phone lines. So our younger listeners won't remember this, but back in the 90s, to get online, you literally had to dial a phone number from your computer. Your computer would then shriek at you.
Like literally a demon. Kill me! Like it would tell you to kill it, and you'd have to be like, no, give me internet, and then I'll kill you.
You have to stab it, yeah.
And then you have to stab it, and then the internet would work.
Such an unfortunate sound. And then when the internet finally answered the phone, you would very, very slowly like feed your Neopets or browse your friends' GeoCities pages or whatever until your mom yelled at you to stop hogging the phone line.
No, or until someone in the house picked up the phone, which would literally kick you offline in some cases.
So it's hard to imagine now, but tech policy of the mid-90s was surprisingly bipartisan. So this was when the internet was emerging as this consumer good. And at the time, both the neoliberal Clinton administration and Congress decided that the private sector should lead on the internet. And of course, now we live in the present and we can see that this decision in many ways was a big success. Like the US led the world in developing internet technology for decades. American companies invented the first popular web browser, social media, email, streaming, online video, the modern-day smartphone, the podcast. We're arguably leading the world in AI, although China might win that war. But of course, there's been a cost to this, right? So on the one hand, consumer technology is amazing. I never have to read magazine headlines for entertainment while standing in line at the grocery store again. Love that for us. But on the other hand, at this very moment, some octogenarian is wiring the last of her savings to a Nigerian scammer who sent her a deepfake of her grandson claiming to be kidnapped. You know, there have been trade-offs to this.
So the sort of early debate over internet regulation, what did that look like at a time when the internet was like way, way smaller and less important than it is today?
So like I said, Congress and the president at the time, Bill Clinton, they were sort of in lockstep on this, but there were some skeptics. So Ralph Nader is probably the most famous one. He was concerned about corporate power and consumer rights. He was like for our younger listeners, he was like our unelected Bernie of the day. You think that's accurate? Yeah,
I think that. Yeah, well, but with like a tiny, tiny fraction of the charisma.
True, but possibly more consequential if you believe that he spoiled the 2000 election for George Bush.
Yeah.
So there was Ralph Nader. There was also Jerry Falwell Jr. He was a televangelist. He thought that without government oversight, the internet would spread pornography and indecency. I don't know where he got that idea.
No, well, yes, really. He was way off. It turned out that didn't happen at all.
There was also Lawrence Lessig, the legal scholar. So he was an early advocate for internet freedom and open access, and he raised concerns about how commercial interests might stifle innovation. He's going to come up again. But big picture, the whole debate boiled down to a simple question. Should ISPs, internet service providers, which at the time, AOL, Earthlink, CompuServe, companies that barely exist anymore, should those ISPs be treated like basic telephone companies with strict government oversight, or should they be lightly regulated and given the freedom to run their businesses as they saw fit? And in the 90s, the latter camp won. Rather than being regulated as common carriers, broadband would be regulated as what was called information services. So let the market rule.
And where does net neutrality sort of enter the picture?
Okay, so the term network neutrality was coined in 2003 by Tim Wu, also a legal scholar, now at Harvard. He would later become one of the strongest advocates for net neutrality in the Biden White House. Later that same year, in 2003, Tim Wu and Lawrence Lessig, I mentioned him a second ago, he's very influential, does a lot of advocacy in copyright law and the open internet. He also founded Creative Commons. The two of them formally presented a letter to the FCC that contained the term network neutrality, but they didn't really define what it meant.
Well, how do we define it now?
So it's one of those terms that has had different meanings throughout time and depending on who is using it. But it basically means that ISPs, internet service providers, should treat all internet traffic equally without blocking, slowing down, or giving special treatment to any particular websites or types of content. So in theory, it protects small-time websites or disfavored websites, like you brought up indie porn creators. That would be one.
Yeah.
It prevents them from getting throttled, while big-time websites with connections to Comcast or whoever would get essentially a fast lane. So it's about fairness and openness, so smaller creators and startups would get the same access and treatment as giant companies. And the fear was that without net neutrality, the big companies would stifle innovation. There'd be this tiered system for the internet. And this fear became very pervasive in pockets of American culture, in no small part thanks to one very smug British comedian, but we will come back to him.
Ricky Gervais? Oh, okay. One thing that I just find interesting about these early days of the debate is, like, I don't think anyone could have quite understood the extent to which, like, quote unquote independent creators are completely intertwined with these giant companies like TikTok, YouTube.
Right. I mean, some of them are giant companies, right? Like in the beginning, YouTube, small independent startup, now the biggest, owned by Google, one of the biggest companies in the world.
Well, I mean, like, it could be, I'm sure there's some technically artists and creators who, like, have their own website or do their own thing, but basically all of them are completely reliant on juggernaut Goliath companies, as are even we. Right.
I mean, we're on Substack. We don't have our own.
Well, not just Substack, but like most of the people who listen to this not via Substack do so through Apple Podcasts or Spotify. I mean, it's like, Okay, so, but at the time these issues were first brought up, was this like actually a problem?
Not really, but Tim Wu was looking forward. And so he framed net neutrality as a means to preserve competition, right? So Goliath couldn't strangle David in the future. And regulators took notice of Wu's work. So in 2005, this was during the second George W. Bush administration, then FCC Chairman Kevin Martin, he was a Republican. He adopted a voluntary policy statement that was a near copy of what Wu had been advocating for. And I'm going to generalize a bit because there are definitely exceptions to this, but in general, net neutrality has always been somewhat partisan, with progressives like Wu and Lawrence Lessig championing it and Republicans pushing back. So progressives want more regulation, conservatives want less, or at least that's how it used to be before Trump upended everything. So Martin, he was a Republican. He was an outlier among his party. And the more common conservative or libertarian position is that this regulation just isn't necessary. Net neutrality is a solution in search of a problem. That's a phrase that you will hear a lot in anti-net neutrality circles. And the people in those circles generally argue that throttling or blocking just isn't something that happens. ISPs don't do this. It would be against their interest to throttle or block sites or otherwise violate the principles of net neutrality because consumers would hate it. So it's not that the principles of net neutrality don't have value. It's that you don't need the government to enforce the rules because they're enforcing them on their own. Does that make sense?
Yeah, basically the incentives are for ISPs to not engage in this stuff. So why do we need to regulate?
Exactly. But there was one famous case where an ISP was doing just that. So Jesse, were you a big BitTorrent guy back in the day?
I've torrented from time to time, although I probably last did so 20 years ago, 15 years ago.
Okay, so explain what that is.
I mean, so there was this golden era of pirating content. Napster at its peak, you could download basically anything. BitTorrent was the system where I think it was slightly different technology because I believe you would download like bits and pieces from different people. So I remember like if there was a game that was really popular to be pirated, 1,000 different people would be contributing to your download at once and it would happen really quickly. I think that's how it worked.
Yeah, so BitTorrent is actually a peer-to-peer technology in itself. It's a way of moving data, so music or video games or whatever, from place to place or from user to user. So like Napster and LimeWire, they were not based on BitTorrent technology. There were sites like the Pirate Bay. I was a big the Pirate Bay guy, and the Pirate Bay was like it was like a database of places where you could BitTorrent. I'm not sure if that's the correct verb, but back in the day, if you wanted music, you had to either pay for it, get one of your friends to burn you a CD, or listen to the radio for your favorite song to come on, at which point, you had to do this mad dash to hit the record button on your tape player before you missed too much of the intro. Kids today, they don't realize this, but music wasn't always free. So when I was in college, I would spend hours very, very slowly downloading like Ani DeFranco and whole songs from BitTorrent sites or other peer-to-peer networks. It was painstaking labor, plus it was illegal. And there started to be news stories about people being sued for using these sites. So you also...
Did you ever get one of the letters from the...
No, did you get one?
Yeah. I think when I was at Brandeis... Yes. I forget what happened. I think I probably had to pay a few bucks. They wouldn't just sue you. They would just I think it was much more common for them to send letters and be like, if you don't pay us, we'll sue you. There were a couple big big lawsuits, though.
Yeah, I mean, there were actually thousands of lawsuits against people who shared music. And by the way, sometimes people shared music without even being aware of it. Like if you were downloading something, you were also uploading it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it depended on your settings and stuff, but I think people didn't realize often that, yes, that the pipes flowed both ways, as it were.
Right. And the Recording Industry Association of America, they absolutely despise this. And they wanted to scare people, so they would send out demand letters like yours, or they would actually sue people. So like a single mother was fined over $200,000 for sharing just 24 songs.
I hope they were good. Like, suck if it was just really bad music.
It was all Limp Bizkit. Plus the founders of some of those file sharing sites were actually arrested, like the founders of the Pirate Bay. They were arrested and tried in Sweden, and they were all sentenced to a year in prison, although it's Swedish prison, so it's like you have to work in IKEA for a year. One of them actually fled and was later captured in Cambodia, but that's a story for a different day. Anyway, in the early 2000s, Comcast began throttling these peer-to-peer technologies, like these BitTorrent technologies, which explains why it would take you 3 hours to download less than Jake. ISPs really hated these services, not just because of the legal headaches from their users illegally downloading content, but because these networks use massive bandwidth, which cost the ISPs a lot of money and strained their infrastructure. So Comcast starts testing this throttling technology around 2005, but this was a secret. They didn't announce that they were doing this. Then, 2 years later, the AP released this big investigation reporting that Comcast was slowing down file sharing applications without disclosing the practice to customers.
And was that legal for them to do that?
Yes, because when FCC Chairman Kevin Martin, I mentioned a moment ago, the Bush FCC chairman, when he adopted Tim Wu's principles of net neutrality, all internet traffic will be treated equally, no throttling, etc., compliance was voluntary.
Okay.
Now, at the time, Comcast denied that they were doing this, but internet advocacy groups pounced on them, and they filed a complaint with the FCC claiming that Comcast had violated network neutrality principles. And so the FCC issued an order censoring Comcast, and that moment really started the nearly 20-year regulatory battle over net neutrality.
So these rules were voluntary, but they could lead you to be censored by the FCC? I'm confused by that.
Yes, it is confusing. So the FCC argued that because they had general authority to regulate broadband practices, they could censure the company. But Comcast was like, no, you can't do that. And they took the FCC to court. Now, at the time, Comcast was mainly worried about the FCC upending the company's terms of service because Comcast offered tiers of service and they banned residential customers from running servers. So running BitTorrent effectively made residential customers into servers, which was not allowed under the lowest service tier. Of course, customers could upgrade to a higher tier of service, but that was expensive. So that was their main issue. They wanted to be able to charge customers higher prices depending on the service. So Comcast files their suit in August 2008. Obama takes office the following January, and he appointed a new FCC chairman, Julius Genachowski. And Genachowski made it known that preserving a free and open internet would be one of the commission's primary goals under his watch. And so he set out to formally codify the principles of net neutrality into the FCC's rules. But then in 2010, court released its decision in that case. And because broadband had been classified under the 1996 Telecommunications Act as a lightly regulated information services rather than as a common carrier, the court found that the FCC lacked the authority to regulate the ISP's network management practices the way it tried to. So Comcast won, and that ruling had major policy implications because it effectively upended the FCC's early efforts to codify net neutrality. So does this make sense, Jesse? Let's just check in. It's a lot of information.
It is a lot of information, but my pipes are well lubricated, so I understand so far, yes.
Okay, do you want to just sum it up for me? Let's just. Well,
okay. The last part about the upending. What was upending was saying the courts being like the FCC cannot regulate the ISPs in this way. Right. The ISPs can actually make their own calls about this stuff.
Yes.
Okay.
And this is because they are not common carriers. They are not utilities. They are classified as information services.
Gotcha.
Got it?
Yeah.
Okay. So a few months after that judgment was announced, the FCC released the 2010 Open Internet Order. There were three main rules to this order. First, ISPs had to be transparent, which Comcast had not been when throttling BitTorrents. So they had to disclose their practices to consumers. Second, no blocking. any lawful content had to be accessible. And third, no fast lanes. So they could not throttle unfavored services or sites or apps and speed up favored ones.
Wait, so they don't have the authority to manage ISP or to regulate ISPs, but they're making new...
Yes.
We keep going, it looks like it's this constant tug of war where the FCC is saying, we have this power, and the ISPs are like, screw you.
Yes, and the courts are also like, the ISPs are right. Yes, you got it.
Yeah.
So there were lots of complicated legal maneuvering here, but basically the FCC pointed to a rule from the 1996 Telecommunications Act that says that the FCC should help more people get internet access. So the FCC argued that net neutrality is a part of that. But these arguments were kind of legally dubious, and Verizon immediately filed suit against the FCC. And by the way, this is a little bit confusing because we think of Verizon as a phone company. So as a phone company, Verizon is a common carrier, but they're also a broadband company. As a broadband company, they are not.
They swing both ways.
They swing both ways, exactly. They're bisexual.
An open-minded billion-dollar... Okay.
So all of this happened before the term net neutrality really entered the public consciousness. But this period was crucial for what was to come a couple years later, because during this period, internet advocacy groups really transformed net neutrality from this obscure telecommunications policy that no one outside of DC or Comcast HQ knew about into a rallying cry for digital rights. Because when Comcast was unmasked as throttling BitTorrent, this was seen as evidence that Tim Wu was right. Big business was throttling the people. So he predicted this.
And this became like a big advocacy movement. Who were the advocates other than Tim Wu?
Okay, so one big one was a group called Free Press, not to be confused.
The Free Press? Barry White? Oh.
Not to be confused with the Free Press. There's actually a note on the contact form of their website that says, if you are attempting to contact the Free Press, we are not affiliated with that Substack publication. It seems a little, I think there's some shade there.
Substack publication. We are a Substack podcast.
Yeah. So they were founded in 2003 as part of a broader media reform movement. That group also established Save the Internet. This was another advocacy group, and they organized a conference on media reform that brought together activists concerned about media consolidation and corporate control of information. So they were basically anti-big business folks, and as life moved online, so did these organizers, and progressive organizers in particular really adopted the internet as a mechanism to rally the troops, and they were good at it. And it's sort of interesting that today we tend to think of the right as particularly good at mobilizing online. You know, the left can't meme, all that. But that was certainly not true 15 years ago. The internet was the realm of progressives.
Move on. MoveOn.org.
Yes, move on. Yeah. And around the same time, there was another battle over who or what would control the internet that really demonstrated this. So, Jesse, do you remember SOPA and PIPA?
No. Is this SOPA and PIPA? Is this related to the indie porn websites?
Are you thinking of FERPA and PUPA?
FERPA and PUPA. What's PUPA? Never mind.
You don't know about
I know
PUPA?
FUPA. Do you say PUPA or FUPA? FUPA, I know.
FERPA and PUPA.
Fat upper pubic area. Okay, just, yes. SOPA and PIPA, I do not remember these
I thought
terms.
it was pussy area. Okay, so
I was trying to use family-friendly language because I know there's a lot of kids listening to this net neutrality history podcast.
Oh yeah, they are super interested. Okay, so SOPA and PIPA were twin bills, formerly called the
That's the hottest kind of bills, twin bills.
the Stop Online Piracy Act and the Protect IP Act. And these were bills that were backed by the recording industry, by Hollywood, by industries that didn't want their shit pirated and spread online. So like the Motion Picture Association, they were a big supporter, as were large publishing houses. But activists and some big tech companies were worried that the bills went too far in enforcing copyright infringement laws, and that this would infringe on online freedom of speech. So in January 2012, the advocacy group Fight for the Future helped to organize a series of coordinated protests against these bills, and they recruited not just internet activists, but companies like Google, Reddit, Mozilla, Flickr, and they were all campaigning against this. And as part of these anti-SOPA and PIPA protests, some of these websites shut down for the day or partially shut down. Do you remember this at all?
Very vaguely. And it's funny because like at the time, if you'd asked me, but at the time I would have told you this was like a super important internet rights thing, despite not knowing anything about it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So like they had this day of action. It was January 18th, 2012. Wikipedia replaced all its articles with a black screen and a message urging readers to contact Congress. Reddit went completely dark for 12 hours. They put up an anti-SOPA message on the homepage. Boing, boing, remember boing, boing. They took the site down. They took the site offline entirely. I'm sure at least one person noticed. Google placed a black censorship bar over its logo and linked to a petition that got over 7 million signatures. So Craigslist, Minecraft, the Cheeseburger Network, they all took some sort of public stand.
Wait, like of I Can Has Cheeseburger?
Which was, at the time,
that was back
huge.
Then, that was one of our biggest news sources, was I Can Has Cheeseburger.
So they all took some sort of public stand against this, and it worked. Millions of people called their Congress members. Lawmakers started withdrawing support, and SOPA and PIPA were killed shortly after this. And this demonstrated that online organizing could be this powerful force in moving public opinion and even changing policy. And at the time, the mood was optimistic that the internet could be harnessed for progressive change.
This was also around the time of the Arab Spring, right? So there was a lot of because we tweeted from Tahrir Square, there's going to be democracy in the Middle East, which turned out to be true. There's now, democracy has flowered in the region.
I feel so dumb when I think about that optimism that I also shared, but it really
I mean, optimism in general is just very dumb. It's a truly debunked belief system.
Like Occupy Wall Street. I was like, we got it, guys.
Yeah.
We're taking
Occupy that shit.
They still on Wall Street?
I don't know. Every time I go there, the only thing I notice, there's like that statue of the girl standing up to the bowl, which like reliably has 25 tourists posing with it and taking photos of it.
Yeah, I mean, this was a time when people thought Google was a benevolent company. Don't be evil, right? And I should say, this optimism about technology's democratic potential wasn't new. It had deep roots in the countercultural origins of the internet itself. Like, yeah, the internet did emerge from military technology. It was funded by DARPA. But from the beginning, the internet was shaped by idealists who imagined it as this decentralized space for the free exchange of information outside of traditional hierarchies and corporate gatekeepers. And so by 2012, organizers were successfully harnessing the internet for their causes, and one of those in the coming years would become net neutrality. Okay, so by this point in our story, net neutrality was still not a household name. But again, there were activist groups organizing around it. So in addition to Free Press, there was the Open Society Foundation, that's George Soros' thing. There was also the Knight Foundation, the MacArthur Foundation, the Mozilla Foundation, and the Ford Foundation. The Ford Foundation in particular was a major donor, so they dropped $46 million in support of pro-net neutrality organizations. But it wasn't until 2014 that the larger public would really become aware of net neutrality.
So what happened then?
A lot happened in 2014. Before we get to that, you have to understand what was going on in the legal battle over net neutrality. So by this point, the FCC has attempted to codify the principles of net neutrality using that 2010 OpenNet Internet Order. I mentioned that a moment ago. There were 3 basic rules. Again, transparency, no blocking,
no fat chicks. Oh, sorry.
Yes.
This was 2010. You could say that.
No unreasonable discrimination. So there can't be a fast lane or slow lane. And again, they were immediately sued by Verizon. So that's working its way through the courts. Meanwhile, all these activist groups I just mentioned are rallying around this cause, trying to get the public to care about what, this thing that had really been a niche issue. So activists knew they had to make people care, like they'd made people care about SOPA and PIPA, and they did this by expanding the coalition. So there's a book called Net Neutrality and the Battle for the Open Internet. It's by an academic named Danny Kimball. And he writes in the book that the organizers brought in musicians, Harry Potter fans, realtors, women's group, labor unions, indigenous communities, Black and Latino activists on this issue. Quote, no matter what differences in perspective, background, interests, or tactics each of these groups had, they were united against the telecommunications industry and united for net neutrality rules. This diverse coalition was able to come together around 2 points, a common enemy and a common goal. And that common enemy was big cable.
And so what was the actual goal of the organizers?
Okay, so I'm going to explain this, but first we have to do a little background. I'm sorry. This is a very complicated issue. So, it doesn't like really sum up very well in like a 20-minute, HBO episode.
Huh.
Anyway, in January 2014, the DC District Court ruled on Verizon v. FCC. This was both a win and a loss for the FCC. So remember, they'd implemented those 3 rules for ISPs, which Verizon sued over. Those rules again, be transparent, don't slow or block websites, treat all traffic equally. And the court's decision was mixed. So the court said that the FCC could still enforce the transparency rule, but it couldn't stop ISPs from throttling or force them to treat all traffic the same. And the ruling hinged on this very wonky shit about how broadband is legally classified. So remember in the beginning, how I told you that telephone companies were strictly regulated as common carriers and broadband providers were not.
Yeah.
So basically the court said that if the FCC wanted to enforce net neutrality, ISPs needed to be reclassified as common carriers like telephone companies, which for ISPs like Verizon, Comcast, etc., this is basically their worst nightmare for many reasons. But in particular, they feared that the government would impose price controls. So for ISPs, this was about way more than net neutrality. It was about moving from being lightly regulated to being heavily regulated, which they did not want.
Yeah.
So to answer your question, this is what the net neutrality activists and organizers were fighting for. They wanted ISPs to be reclassified as common carriers, which would then enable the FCC to legally codify the principles of net neutrality. Do you follow?
Okay. I do follow, yes.
Do you really follow?
They wanted the ISPs to be classified as common carrier. Yeah.
You got it. So this fight also coincided with Comcast's attempted buyout of Time Warner Cable. That was announced in February 2014. So for net neutrality advocates, that merger represented both an existential threat and a powerful organizing tool.
It's almost quaint, given where we are today. Comcast buying out Time Warner Cable just looks like one lemonade stand run by children buying out a site. Like, just, I know these were very powerful companies then and now, but like compared to today. Yep.
Right. But this is what they'd been warning about, right? Like if Comcast, which at the time was the nation's largest cable company, if they absorbed...
And universally beloved. Anyone who's interacted with Comcast knows that their customer service is so good that gives them power.
If they absorb the second largest competitor, this would create this monolith, this entity with, an unprecedented ability to manipulate internet traffic and to discriminate against content creators if they felt like it. So, before a lot of this debate had been abstract, right? Theoretical, what might happen in the future. But this merger proposal made it real because Comcast would control the internet for nearly a third of American broadband users. So this was a big deal. Literally, the price was over $45 billion.
Right. And okay, so jokes aside, this is a big deal.
How much did Elon pay for Twitter? Wasn't it about that?
$44 billion.
So less than 10 years later, Twitter alone was worth more than buying all of Time Warner Cable.
It's fucking insane.
To be fair, it was a great purchase on his part.
Yeah.
He's really made his money back.
And it has had nothing but positive effects on society. So just win.
I love the elevation of Cat Turd. I think this is fantastic for them.
That's Professor Cat Turd.
So in May 2014...
Actually, would that... Okay, I'm sorry. Yes. Just not to derail us. Let's say Trump threatens Princeton, for example, with major sanctions and the withholding of federal funds, unless it makes Cat Turd an honorary professor. Who blinks first? Because I'm not sure at this point.
I don't know. We have to get his GRE scores. So in May 2014, there was a meeting at the FCC to decide whether or not to open proposed net neutrality rules to public comment. So this was just a procedural vote. Will we allow the public to weigh in on this issue? Net neutrality advocates were obviously in favor of this, and a full week before the meeting, activists started camping out outside the FCC headquarters like they were getting the next Harry Potter book at Barnes & Noble in 2003. And during the meeting, dozens of protesters were outside banging on drums, and then inside the meeting, 5 protesters from a group calling themselves Occupy the FCC were escorted out because they kept yelling at the commissioners. Now, once again, Republicans were generally against this, both the performance art and net neutrality. They didn't think it was necessary, the comment period or net neutrality itself, but they were outnumbered on the commission 3-2, and the majority FCC members voted to open the docket for public comment. Just 3 weeks later, on June 1st, 2014, one Mr. Jon Oliver decided to... Dr.
Jon Oliver.
Decided to weigh in, and that decision changed everything.
All right, Katie, should we do just a very brief abridged housekeeping?
Let's do it.
Blocked Reported podcast at gmail.com. BlockedReported.org. You can become a premium subscriber to support our work and rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to, wherever the pipes shoot all over you.
You got to make it gross, don't you?
Why? Why are you laughing? That's how the internet works. Should we get back to it, Katie?
Yes. So it's early June 2014, and Jon Oliver
Daddy.
has decided...
I call him Daddy. Not weird. He's my daddy.
Do you think he is someone's daddy?
Well, yes.
He seems like a gay uncle.
I think I could see Jon Oliver being
he has a hot wife.
The hot Republican wife,
yes,
right?
Republican wife. Yes, we're going to need to stop and Google this really quick.
Okay.
Jon Oliver, wife. Oh, Kate Norley, so far out of his league. He looks like he rented her.
I mean, that's not...
You know what the thing is about women? Women like a funny man. It makes no sense.
I was going to say...
They're blind. They're blind. He's 5'8". He's 47 years old. And he looks like a fucking elf.
He wasn't 47. First of all, he's only 47. That's so depressing. But he also wasn't 47 when they got married. He was early 30s.
Probably, but he probably looked exactly the same. His wife looks like she belongs on Fox News. There is.
Look, on this podcast, we believe the sexes are completely the same in every way. That being said, the hold steady line, guys go for looks, girls go for status. There is some truth to that.
Do you think he has status?
Does Jon Oliver have status? No, he has no status. He's a total loser and a burnout with no career.
Okay. Anyway, so he decides.
So what did Daddy do?
He decides that he's going to get involved in the net neutrality wars, and he decides this.
Oh, bully.
Right when the FCC is deciding whether or not to reclassify ISPs as common carriers and pave the way for net neutrality. And Jesse, we have a lot of international listeners. We're a very global podcast. And our international listeners, they might not have had the pleasure of watching Last Week Tonight with Jon Oliver. It's not a normal late night talk show with like a host who does jokes or bits or a monologue up top, and then you have a celebrity who's there to promote a new show or a movie or show off their legs. Jon Oliver's show is different. So Jesse, for anyone who has not had the pleasure, can you describe the format?
I watched Jon Oliver for a long time, and Jon Oliver, it's sort of a late night show with a mission, and they often do these, effectively investigative segments, not full like 60 minutes, but they will. I got called by one of the researchers once. I think it was about supplements. This was before I was problematic.
Yeah. I know which episode you did not get called for their researcher on.
Right. Well, I don't worry. I am so full of resentment. I will definitely bring that up shortly. But yeah, Jon Oliver, the format, who came up with the name Clafter? Like clapping with laughter? Like, ha ha ha, that's so right.
That might have been Louis C.K.
Might have been, was it?
Maybe not.
Doesn't sound like anyway,
I think it was me. I think I did that.
I don't think you did that.
It was me or Louis C.K., one of us.
Was it Hitler? I think it was Hitler.
Maybe it was Jeff Maurer.
Maurer? It actually could have been Maurer. Did you say Maurer?
Yeah, Maurer.
Maurer.
Whatever. Maybe it was Jeff. Jeff's chime in. Did you come up with Clapter?
I always want to tell straightforward stories. You always derail us. Jon Oliver, it's this format of just like incredible smug quote unquote investigation. I'm sure some of the investigations are good. I was a big fan. Jon Oliver is a very, very funny Brit, started on The Daily Show. He also had a really good podcast called The Bugle back in the day I listened to.
I loved The Bugle, and then his co-host sister was kind of mean to me.
Explain.
So his co-host of The Beagle, the show was very funny. So it was
The Bugle.
It was
not The Beagle. I know you're obsessed with dogs. The Bugle.
It was Jon Oliver and Andy Saltzman. He has a sister named Helen Saltzman. And she had a language podcast, and she came to Seattle some years ago when I was working at The Stranger, and she was doing an episode on the word queer. So I met her on a Saturday when she interviewed me, and I talked about how much I hated this term because all it had no meaning, and all it did was tell you that if you met a guy who said he was queer, that could mean that he likes to choke women. It's meaningless. And I complained about straight people appropriating this term, and she cut me out of the podcast and then blocked me on Twitter.
Damn.
So therefore, I don't like Jon Oliver. This is guilt by association. It's 6 degrees of fuck you.
Look, I'm sure some of Oliver's stuff has been good. Jeff Maurer, my buddy who I've done some stuff with, he has written about his time writing for him, and he has critiqued Oliver. You can look that up. But when Oliver did this big episode on youth gender medicine stuff, I almost lost my fucking mind. It was so bad. And we did an episode I led, him and Jon Stewart, basically within I think a week of each other, maybe it was even the same week, both did these unbelievably poorly done segments on this issue. One of the only issues I know a lot about, and Oliver butchered it. And it was sort of hard for me to ever, the warning signs were there. Anyone this smug who treats the world as there's the correct view, and then there's those fucking morons who don't agree with us. That's usually not a good sign. But yeah, I would not these days. It'd be very hard for me to trust Oliver on any subject I didn't know about because. Yeah.
Yes, but in 2014 we were also dumb.
God, he was daddy.
Yeah,
he was daddy.
And so he takes these complex issues and he simplifies them in a way that your average Sunday night HBO watcher can understand. But the problem is he's often wrong. He's the Michael Hobbs of late night. Like, he convinces you that you know, that he and therefore you know the truth about an issue, but oftentimes he's simplifying it in a way that it's just like it's overly simplistic. He leaves out a lot of nuance, and it seems as though the researchers and the writers oftentimes have an agenda, one they might not even be aware of, and they will cherry pick evidence to suit that agenda. And this isn't uncommon at all in media, but it means it's not exactly a trustworthy source of information. And in this net neutrality episode, there are a few things that Oliver just got plain wrong. So let's listen to a clip.
Ending net neutrality would allow big companies to buy their way into the fast lane, leaving everyone else in the slow lane, although telecom companies would prefer that you put it in a slightly different way.
When you say fast lane and slow lane, it's a good illustration, but what you really should be talking about is a fast lane for everybody and a hyperspeed lane for others.
Bullshit.
Okay, so his first sentence there, ending net neutrality would allow big companies to buy their way into the fast lane, leaving everyone else in the slow lane. So the problem with that, Jesse, is that it was backwards. The debate at the FCC wasn't whether or not to end net neutrality, it was whether or not to implement it in a way that could survive legal challenges. Because, as I'm sure you recall from 10 minutes ago, in Verizon v. FCC, the courts had ruled that the FCC did not have the authority to enforce net neutrality, which was why activists were trying to get broadband reclassified as a common carrier.
That's like a pretty basic thing to get wrong.
Yes, It's very basic. It was not about ending net neutrality. It was about implementing net neutrality. And this shows a basic level of ignorance from Oliver and his writing staff. Sorry, Jeff.
I blame Jeff. Yeah, I was going to say, Jeff, this sounds like a Jeff photo.
What's more, even though the de facto state at the time was that net neutrality was not the law of the land, you didn't see customer complaints about ISPs throttling the internet or blocking access to disfavored websites, which is exactly why the anti-net neutrality advocates said this is a solution in search of a problem. And I should say, Oliver was not alone in framing the debate like this. Everywhere you looked, the story was the FCC is going to end net neutrality. So here's just one example. Josh Harkinson in Mother Jones, he wrote, "The FCC was proposing to replace net neutrality, the egalitarian internet that we all know, with a pay-to-play platform designed to favor the biggest and richest players." Now, do you see what's the problem with that, Jesse?
Yeah, I mean, I get, and I'm sure we'll get to this. It is an inaccurate framing, it sounds like. I guess the question is, it could be they were pointing to a thing that was still worth being worried about. Like, it could still be, if they make certain changes, it could get that. But it's very disingenuous to frame it as like, this is the current thing and they're trying to end it.
Right. So there's a tech journalist named Tim B. not to be confused with Tim Berners-Lee, who invented the web browser. Close, though. And he told me, this was a brilliant, if misleading, way to gain widespread attention. It's much easier to rally public outrage if you convince people that the FCC is taking away something you already have. We didn't have net neutrality. They weren't taking it away. They were talking about implementing it. So let's listen to another clip from Oliver.
Telecom companies will say they would never slow down a website speed in order to get more money out of them. But let me tell you a little story. Recently, Comcast was negotiating with Netflix. This graph shows Netflix download speeds on various providers. That black line plummeting downwards was their speed on Comcast during the negotiation. See if you can guess when Netflix agreed to Comcast demands. I'll give you a hint. It's right there. That has all the ingredients of a mob shakedown. Oh, Netflix, nice show about life in a ladies' prison. Such a shame if there was going to be something happen to your connection there. So frustrating that would be.
All right, Jesse, so Oliver had this graph on the screen. I want you to describe it for me.
Right, so this is a graph of the speed for Netflix customers, and it goes down late in 2013, and then in January 2014, spikes back up.
Yeah, so Oliver is claiming that Comcast throttled Netflix's customers' speed as a negotiation tactic. Now, that negotiation had nothing to do with net neutrality. This dispute was about something called peering, which is how networks exchange traffic. Basically, they were fighting over who would fit the bill to upgrade the points where Netflix and Comcast meet and exchange data. These are called interconnection points.
And the point being that, far be it for me to defend Comcast, but streaming platforms just use up a huge amount of bandwidth.
Yes.
So I'm taking that's what this argument came down to.
Yes. And Oliver and Netflix itself, they claim that Comcast intentionally slowed their speeds to pressure the company. But there's no conclusive evidence of this. And it's just as likely that the slowdown was due to congestion at those interconnection points, so just straight up heavy traffic rather than deliberate throttling, or B, that Netflix itself was dropping its speed for Comcast customers as part of their own negotiating tactics.
And how can we, well, first of all, it's interesting to think back to 2014 when Netflix is just this innocent little mom and pop company going up against the Comcast.
They're the startup.
Yeah. No, and Netflix was already pretty big, but nothing like today.
Right.
But how do we have any sense of like what the truth is here? Whether you're saying it could just be just as likely Netflix was doing the throttling.
Yeah, so this is an extremely technical issue that I'm too dumb to explain and you're too dumb to understand, and there's no smoking gun here.
Thank you.
You're welcome. But what we do have are independent measurements from engineers that showed that the slowdown occurred where Netflix's traffic entered Comcast network, not the other way around. And Netflix subsequently admitted to using this tactic in other disputes, albeit not during the Comcast negotiations. And by the way, even if net neutrality had been the law of the land at the time, which was not, Netflix itself would never have been required to adhere to those principles because they aren't an internet service provider, they're a content provider. And I'm not claiming that Oliver got everything wrong in this episode. He didn't, I'm sure he didn't. And honestly, he can be commended for making this dry technical issue interesting and easy to digest. But again, he simplifies the issue in a way that actually misleads people. He did what he usually does. He made it seem like this was an easy story with clear villains, and that would be cable companies and then FCC Chairman Tom Wheeler, and clear heroes, and that would be net neutrality advocates. And it's just not that simple. And like you said, it is sort of funny that when this aired, Netflix was seen as the David to Comcast Goliath. Today, their market cap is like 3 times that of Comcast. No one thinks of Netflix as the little guy anymore.
Yeah, although to be fair, it was different back then. But yes, it's funny.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. So in another part of the show, Oliver showed a chart that ranked internet speeds by nation, with the U.S. coming in at 31st place. And he pointed out that Comcast and Time Warner had the lowest customer satisfaction ratings of almost any corporation in America. And I've been a customer of both. I believe it.
Yeah, same. They suck.
Yeah, I once had to return a Time Warner modem in person an hour from where I lived because they wouldn't accept it by mail.
That's insane.
But Oliver's message seemed to be that net neutrality would speed up broadband and improve customer service, and that was never true. Net neutrality was about stopping ISPs from picking winners and losers when it came to internet content. That's it. It was never going to make service faster. It was never going to make these companies suck less. But Oliver muddled the issues so it seemed like these issues were connected, and they just weren't.
Why is our broadband so low by sort of developed world standards anyway?
So there are a few reasons for this, and some of it does have to do with corporate consolidation and monopolies. That's real. There are very few mom and pop internet providers anymore, although I happen to have one. His name is Jeff. Do you want to see his website?
Yes.
Click on that link.
It's just like a very bare bones minimalist website, and then
it's a picture of an office with an empty.
It's like a low resolution photo of an office. Yeah.
Yes, and then if you go to the menu bar, you get 3 options: home, contact, and services. You can't do auto pay. It's like, it is extremely bare bones, but it's actually kind of awesome. But this is rare. This is the first time in my life I've had like an actual independent ISP and not one of the big guys.
Yeah.
So that's part of it. Corporate behemoths tend to be more concerned with stock price and customer satisfaction. But another key factor here is simply that the US is really big. We have a low density country with huge rural regions. And when global internet speed rankings are done by country, they're based on national averages. And in 2014, those averages got pulled down by the many areas that still had very slow DSL or almost no broadband at all. So our size and infrastructure gaps played a big role in this ranking. But that's fundamentally a size and infrastructure issue, not a net neutrality issue. And the countries that at the time did have the fastest internet speeds were like South Korea, Japan, Sweden, Hong Kong, Singapore, countries with more urban density where they'd already invested in broadband upgrades like fiber. And you can for sure argue that making broadband a utility like net neutrality advocates wanted, that might have improved customer service. But I'm skeptical because telephone companies are utilities. Electric companies are utilities. There's not many companies I hate more than Verizon and Duke Energy. Plus, if you look at current internet speed rankings, the U.S. now comes in at around number 7. And that's got nothing to do with net neutrality. It's because more places have fiber.
I think you called Hong Kong a country, which could launch some sort of difficult situation, but we'll just ignore that.
If Xi Jinping is listening to this, correction issue.
Just sort of like common sense wise, like especially before we were as wired up as we are now, it never would have made sense to compare us to like much smaller
more
country.
Asian
I don't know.
countries.
I mean, South Korea is not small.
It is just true.
They have better infrastructure. Yeah.
Okay, anyway, Oliver ended his segment with a call to action.
And I'm talking to you, Ron Paul fan 2016. And you, One Direction forever. And I'm talking to you, One Direction sucks balls. We need you to get out there and for once in your lives, focus your indiscriminate rage in a useful direction. Seize your moments, my lovely trolls. Turn on caps lock and fly, my pretties.
So he invited his viewers to go to fcc.gov/comment and make their voices heard, to tell the FCC not to end net neutrality, which of course was not in place, but whatever. And they did in spades. But we're going to save the aftermath of this episode for next week.
Yes, thank you, Katie. I cannot wait to see what Daddy does next. This has been Blocked and Reported. As always, we are produced with help from Jessica the 80s Baby. Bye.